So during this study, people were given an app to put on their iPhones, and this app would ping them periodically throughout the day and ask them a few questions. The first was to gauge their happiness. Basically, how happy are you? And the second was a question that asked, are you thinking about something other than what you are doing? And people responded on average, yes, 47% of the time to this question. So in some sense, you could say people were mind-wandering 47% of the time. And the interesting thing about this is that, so clearly what they were doing had had impact on how happy they were. If they were doing chores, they were less happy than if they were making love, let's say. But it also turns out that whether they were wandering overall had a much bigger impact on their happiness. The wandering made people less happy regardless of what they were doing. So when they're doing chores, they would be less happy if they were mind-wandering during those chores. If they were making love, they'd be less happy if they were mind-wandering during making love. And of course, this unhappiness was greater if they were lost in an unpleasant mind-wandering, but it turns out they were less happy even if they were mind-wandering about something pleasant. And if you look at the data, and they did this, the time analysis shows that it was the wandering that caused the unhappiness, not unhappiness causing wandering later. So this raises an interesting question, because what if you're sitting, I call this the waiting room problem, what if you're sitting in a doctor's waiting room and you're asked this question, are you thinking about something other than what you're doing? At first it seems like there's two ways to respond. One is, I'm sitting here thinking about what I'm doing, which is sitting in a waiting room, bored out of my mind, just sitting, so that sounds pretty crappy. And the other is that you're mind-wandering, in which case the study seems to suggest that you'll be even less happy. So how can this make sense? Well, I think that the question, are you thinking about something other than what you're doing, is really just a proxy for, are you mindless right now? Now remember, the reason that you're wandering might be because you're mindless. If you were continuously and loosely aware of what's going on in your mind during that waiting room, let's say you're planning dinner, then you could be said to be sitting and planning. Then you are thinking about what you're doing. You are sitting and planning. So I want to say this again. Sitting and zoning out about your dinner planning is quite different. It's qualitatively different from sitting and planning out the same dinner with continual awareness of the fact that you're doing so. So you may have heard of being in the now, being in the here and now. And I think it's really about whether you know actively what's going on in your field of experience here and now. Whether that is the feeling of a cool breeze or planning about dinner tonight. I think it's a synonym for being lucidly and ongoingly, continuously aware. And this is important because otherwise you couldn't do things like learn from your past experiences or plan for your future with awareness. And that that doesn't seem to make any sense. So luckily it's not true. You can do these things with awareness. It's just that typically we don't. So to wrap up this section, just by frequently or more frequently observing what's going on in your experience, much of life can take on a very different texture. Pain seems less scary, it seems to hurt less, anger can feel a lot less compelling, and even your garden variety boredom can be replaced by contentment. And contentment doesn't imply complacency. You can act with just as much purpose as you did before. I mean, you can pull your hand out of a flame without having to scream. And similarly, you can right injustices without hatred or malice or any of these other emotions which might otherwise have consumed you. So you get a freedom to choose how you want to feel and how to act.